So, first of all, thank you so much to everyone who's here. And we have so many friends from across the wider Seattle community, not just from Kirkland, but really across the city, and it's fabulous. And I wanted to welcome a lot of our friends from the Kirkland Arts Center. Most of them are on my left here, so a special thanks for coming during your lunch break today. We also have other artists from across Seattle, including Mel Curtis, who showed here earlier this winter and spring. So thanks so much for Mel for coming back, and Mel's been so supportive throughout this entire exhibition series, and many of you probably recognize him now. But the man of the hour is on my left, it's Tyler. Tyler Boley was actually born and raised in Bellevue, and he now lives in Shoreline. He described to me his formative years as having occurred in the 1980s, and he worked with really many masters of the time focused on photography. And he attended a number of different workshops in California, and there he came across some really famous photographers, including Ansel Adams. And I think we could see the effect of Ansel Adams in lots of these works, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that from Tyler today. Tyler's work, interestingly, just like Mel's, pivoted in the 1990s. He took on more corporate clients, a number of large companies, including Bloomberg, Microsoft, and so forth, and I know Tyler will talk a little bit about that. One thing I wanted to mention about Tyler is that he's actually a master printer as well, and he prints photographic works large scale. And he's pretty well known up and down the West Coast for that work, and he's printed actually for Mel, it's something I learned as well. And so I'm sure we'll hear about some of those printing techniques too. And one thing I really admire about Tyler has just been his authenticity. We've gotten to know each other a bit, and when he goes out and he shoots across the Northwest, he described it to me, he just has this big wooden view camera and he uses sheets of film. And he just goes out and he does his thing. And I really admire that in this world of digital photography. Tyler's really sort of kept it real, for lack of a better phrase. I'll say a few words at the very end, but for now, let's put our hands together and please welcome Tyler to our art exhibition series. Over to you, Tyler.
Okay, I'm just going to refer to some notes from time to time because this is something I do every day, and there's no teleprompters. First of all, I want to thank Jesse for inviting me to show my work here, and Mel Curtis for suggesting me to Jesse and introducing us. Also, Jeff Corwin's here helped me bring the work over, and he's another photographer. We go out photographing a lot. In fact, on some of the trips where these were taken, he was with me. And my partner of decades, Beverly, who's also been with me where some of these were shot, and manages to tolerate this obsessional activity. So, yeah, I was born and raised in the area. I grew up on Pine Hill, very close to here. My grandparents lived in Kirkland. We used to swim down at the Houghton Beach down here, and I've been in the area all my life. It was a lot more rural here when I was growing up, so a lot of our childhood was spent in the woods or camping and stuff like that, so there was sort of a connection made with the outdoors from a very early age. That sort of ties into what's important to me about the work that I do and some of the artists that I respect, because they have a connection to the areas where they work, and it sort of results in this sort of sense of place in the work. I got interested in photography very young. I was one of those kids that had no one in the family could get into the bathroom because I was in there developing film. And that continued to evolve over the years. My brother studied fine art photography in college, and that rubbed off on me, and he introduced me to a lot of masters of the sort of black and white West Coast landscape photography era. And then as I got more and more committed to it, like Jesse said, I attended some workshops in Carmel, founded by the Friends of Photography, which was an organization that begun by Ansel Adams and many of the photographers of that generation. So I was exposed to a lot of really interesting photographers during those workshops. I don't know if any of these names would mean anything to you, but people like Ruth Bernard, Linda Connor, Frank Golke, Jerry Olsman, Brett Weston, people like that. And the interesting thing about them was not so much the connection between the work that they did and my work. It was more to me that I was exposed to this really high level of commitment that these people expressed and insisted on. also not only the level of craft, but the developing your own vision, put it that way. So I also had a lot of background in darkroom work in that era, in those days, which the big deal then was master the fine print, and how that translates over into contemporary times is kind of interesting. I'll get into that. So then later I got into commercial photography to make a living. I did a lot of corporate work, a lot of annual reports and stuff like that, as Jesse mentioned, for Nintendo, Microsoft, Bloomberg, and Burlington Northern Santa Fe, companies like that. And that was about a 20-year period, doing mostly corporate work. But also during that time, I mean, none of that work was anything like this, but during that era, I continued to do this personal work on my own. That was an ongoing thing. Being involved in commercial photography, those of us, that was where we were initially exposed to the early stages of digital, because that's where it made its first impact, more than in the consumer market. So we all got exposed to that evolution pretty early on. And one of the things that happened was the onset of digital printing. And this came about primarily because of iris printers initially, which were developed mostly to press proof. Because if commercial jobs were going to go to press, whether they be magazines, brochures, anything like that, there was no way, there were various complicated ways to predict how they were going to look. Because you couldn't start up a big press and do a big press run just to see how it was going to look. So iris printers were developed to proof commercial jobs that were going to go to press. And some fairly innovative people, like you would have heard of Graham Nash. He and his roadie started an early company called Nash Editions. It was one of the first fine art reproduction shops using iris printers. And another guy that I came to know was John Cohn. He was one of the early innovators in that. Now all this transitioned into inkjet printers, Epsons, etc. And so it took a while for it to catch on, but one of the interesting things was that for the first time we could reproduce photography on beautiful fine art papers. Because up until then it was all darkroom papers, light sensitive materials, and all of a sudden you could wrap a beautiful piece of Arch's 100% cotton watercolor paper around a big drum and ink print a photograph on it. Now it took a long time for that to evolve into something that was very useful. The inks were they weren't very archival, for lack of a better word. They were dyes. Anyway, all that evolved. A guy named John Cohn came along. He was one of the earliest innovators of this also, and developed a way to optimize it for black and white. Because all these printers we use, the early iris printers, the Epsons most people use, they're color printers that you can also do black and white on. Well, those of us who primarily are interested in black and white wanted processes that optimized for black and white. I mean, we came from a world where there was color darkrooms and black and white darkrooms, so and each was optimized for each. So John developed these ways of using primarily black and white inks. He removed the color inks entirely and developed software and inks that were maximized for black and white prints. And I got involved with the early days of that. A lot of us would meet. One of the things the internet provides us with is that all these people around the world with niche interests can sort of find each other, and all of a sudden things start to accelerate because we're sharing information.
So let's, as we normally do with these, let's stop every 5 or 7 minutes or so, see if there's any questions at this point in the artist's talk. So any questions about Tyler's background and then his subsequent transition to the printing craft or his corporate career? Because the second half we're going to walk through a lot of these pieces, hear about where they are in the Northwest and so forth. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question about your corporate work. Like, I know you're doing stuff for for your corporate client or whatever, but like, what are there pieces that you did then that you would put on the wall? Like, are there things that did you feel like you got to express yourself at all in any of those, even though you were constrained by the limitations of the commission or whatever?
Yeah, it's a matter of degree. It changes from job to job. I would say a lot of it is pretty highly directed and specific to the job. There was one of the last annual reports that I did everything sort of fell into place. In Burlington Northern Santa Fe, they had a brilliant communications person there who was, there's a long history of collaboration between the railroads in the early West and early photographers. It's like Carlton Watkins and a lot of people that, Muybridge, who did the motion studies, he actually did a lot of work for the railroads. I can't think of the guy's name in San Francisco, is one of the major industrialists that brought the two railroads together in the West. Not really admirable guys, actually, but anyway. So she had this brilliant idea for the annual report. She wanted to send out a fine art black and white landscape photographer to shoot trains in the landscape. And I had already done some annual reports for them, and all of a sudden the designer calls me up and says, she's got this idea. Nobody in this world knows you do this stuff. You got to get a portfolio over to her right away, because she already has worked with you. And so for the first time I got to go out in the middle of nowhere and work with the trains guys, who are amazing guys, and shoot trains in big black and white landscapes with a train in. It was pretty cool. Otherwise, expressing myself through commercial work, it's kind of hard to say. It has more to do, I think, with doing a good job, on your own terms, than the nature of the picture itself, because often you're telling a story for them.
Other questions about the first phase of the presentation?
So I think the kicker of this is you're about to tell us that all of these came off of a printer rather than a darkroom?
That's correct.
Okay.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, he wanted to, he was saying, so obviously all these were printed digitally off a printer rather than a darkroom. The answer is yes.
Is artist printing still being done, or has it been replaced by giclée?
Well, giclée is a funny word because it doesn't apply to specific machines or inks or anything like that. It just means sprayed. Right. That's what giclée means. It's a French word. And it was also trademarked by one of the earliest shops to do this stuff. So it's...
Is iris being done anymore?
No, they can't be maintained well. They're like $100,000 to begin with, and you can't get parts and stuff like that. There are a few warehoused here and there by people like John, but yeah. And not only that, they have a unique look. They're very beautiful. Actually, Mel's done some iris prints back in DC.
Yeah.
For one of the other early innovators named David Adamson. Yeah. But they're the inks or dyes, there might be a little more fleeting over the long term than the newest inkjet printers, which are pigment.
So let's spend the second half of the presentation walking through some of these pieces. I know it'll be tight, that's fine. All of these are actually from the Northwest, I think, with rare exception. So I'm eager to have Tyler walk us through where he took many of these pictures. So if you're able to just sort of come closer to me and to Tyler, and then let's work our way through these.
Okay.
We can start on your left if you want.
Well, I guess one of the things I made a point of doing when selecting what to bring down here was to have it represent a long time period. For example, this one was done in 1980 or 83, I can't remember which. So that's all the way up until this one, which was shot a couple months ago. So there's the time frame here is pretty long. The years shown on each of these pieces are when it was shot, not when it was printed. So several of these were initially printed in silver years ago. So that's an early one as well. If you want to know where these are, that's in Mazama. That's in the Methow Valley. There's a house there now. This is on a trip I was on with Jeff, actually. This is the Nacelle River. That's down, what's the bay down there? Big bay. I want to say Willapa? Yeah. The Nacelle River comes out of the south end of that, goes down into Columbia, I believe. We've been there on a couple of trips, actually. Like I said, this is really old. That's medium format, not the big film. By the way, the camera, I should talk real quickly about the camera. The fact that it's an old wooden camera is sort of meaningless. There are new view cameras being made to this day. So even though we're all shooting with our phones now, including me, there is still a large community out there shooting film, and large sheets of film. And let me skip to this one quickly because this displays the difference. This was shot, I couldn't do this with current technology. So, as much, I embrace new technology as much as anyone, but I want to be able to take the pictures I want to take. And if new technology comes along that doesn't allow me to make the pictures I want to make, then it's not new technology for me, right? So, digital camera, this is in the evening, pointed right into the sun. Barely, and our dog is over here freezing to death. The disk of the sun is literally visible on this film, if you look at it really closely. Now, that's no big artistic achievement, but I'm just talking about the capability of the technology, which is meaningless in many ways other than I need to be able to make the pictures I want to make. So to be able to see into these shadows and capture the sun itself, you know, I don't want to be confronted with a situation and really want to make an image and not be able to do it because the tools I'm using don't allow it. But on the other hand, it's a new technology when it comes to the print itself. So I fall into this category. Go ahead.
You know, but is that, you can't do it with current technology because digital sensors don't have the dynamic range to capture that scene?
Now, the first thing people usually say to me is, what about HDR? Do any of you know what HDR is? That's a digital way of shooting that makes several exposures at varying and then combines them. Well, the water's moving.
Yeah.
Right? So, anyway. You'll see a lot of pictures here at Kalaloch. It's coincidental. I'm not trying to describe Kalaloch. It's just a place I like to go, and I wind up coming out of there with a lot of pictures. This picture represents something that's sort of of interest to me, what you might call a kind of a breakdown of real space. There's not a lot of examples of that here. This is another one, but I like that. Even though it's very much a clear depiction of reality, I like it to sort of break down into something a little more surreal in some instances.
So both this one and that one over there, I just feel like, you know, I've been to places like that. I mean, here, it's like I can see that in the Washington Park Arboretum. But looking at your picture in black and white, it's different. It brings something new that I wouldn't have seen when I just walk by and see a swampy marsh. And my question for you is, do you ever have situations where you take the picture, and you're obviously seeing in color, and then you print it in black and white, and you see, and it surprises
you. It becomes something else.
It surprises you with something that you didn't know was there.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially at the size. You know, I'm looking at a 5x7 ground glass, you know, and I'm just trusting my instincts and the fact that I seem to be excited about making that picture at the time. And I'm discovering as much as anybody would when it gets big. And often when it gets big, I have to throw it away. This is another example of this, the interest I have in kind of destroying the three-dimensional space. The fact that this arc, which is close to the camera, meets that reflection is meaningless because that's a reflection of a tree back there. But it creates this, you know, it becomes a different three-dimensional space than the actual reality. Others don't have that quality at all. Like this is a pretty straightforward landscape. That's an amazing place. We've been there like, I was there with Jeff too. We've been there like 4 times. You're driving along in eastern Washington where there's nothing but wheat fields, and all of a sudden this magnificent row of trees is there coming out like a prow of a ship. Another consistent thing I tend to do, I'm not talking about things I do on purpose, I'm talking about things I've discovered I tend to do over the years. These very centrally placed objects, like the one on the far right, it takes on this iconic, it raises the importance of things when you place it very centrally. And you know, you come across something like that, it looks like something from Blair Witch or The Wicker Man, and there's some bizarre being there, you know, made out of stick. It takes on a new presence to put something in the middle of the frame, not unlike that one. Or the tree, obviously. Another thing I tend to do is there's texture everywhere. I don't have big open landscapes with you know, a dramatic horizon. I don't live in Monument Valley. This is where we live. This is where we live, you know. So let's see. More about the individual pictures.
Let's stop there for a second, Tyler.
Yeah.
So any questions so far? We've got 5 minutes left. Any questions about any of these particular pieces? Yeah.
I do have a question.
Please.
I'm assuming you don't do any post-processing.
Well, I have to scan them all on a drum scanner, bring them into Photoshop.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so some, like the one that you said it could not be done on today's technology, you could possibly draw out the shadows a little bit in that.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I do all the things I would have in the darkroom that are like dodging and burning,
Okay,
etc.
okay.
Right. And not only
You still would
that,
not be able to do that. You still would not be able to grab out.
I couldn't capture it with a new camera or my phone. Yeah, I go, just like the darkroom days, I go through a lot of versions. I have to see it on paper. That's another thing I should make a point of. These images are made to be prints. If I put them, here's a good story about that. It's fairly interesting to me. I had someone approach me about working with him on his images for prints, and he looked at my website and called me back later and he said, well, I looked at the stuff on your website and I don't think that you have anything to offer me in terms of how to print. So then I said, well, we're going to meet anyway, why don't I bring you some of my prints? And after 30 seconds he went, okay, I need you to come in and start helping. Because, they don't look like this on the monitor. I don't optimize them to look good on the monitor. I make test prints and look at them on paper and make alterations accordingly. The same as you would have in the darkroom.
Are those on different papers?
Pardon me?
Are those on different papers? You select different
These
papers?
are all on the same paper. It's 100% cotton paper coated to receive the ink without the ink bleeding. Like if you drop ink on a paper towel, it goes whoosh. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite?
Do I have a favorite? I think most of us tend to like the one we just did the best.
Oh.
So these are the two newest.
Really?
And
Which one, Beth?
The water. Yeah.
well, that's an old one that keeps coming back.
That's fascinating. They're all gorgeous, but a lot of us were like, wow.
Question here, Tyler?
I know that non-glare glass causes distortion, but you have consistently not used non-glare glass and you're getting a lot of reflections?
Well, after seeing the place, everything could have been altered to help that situation, but I wasn't in a position to do that. I like plexiglass because it's colorless. This is plexiglass. It's totally colorless. And, I spend a lot of time on the precise hue of each one of these. They're all a little bit different. And if glass, except for I think there's some glass that is colorless, but usually it has a slight bit of green in it. And all of a sudden the hue that I see that, is irrelevant to everybody else but me, I don't like it anymore. So I carefully select which hue of inks is in which part of the scale in each and every one of these. And I make different test prints with different hue selections to see which brings each one alive a little more to me. You'll see that. They're the same ink set, but there's slight differences in warmth and coolness.
Any other questions from the group? Any questions about the Northwest, in particular, any of these locations?
This guy over here.
This one?
Yes.
You know what? Have you heard of Enchantment Lakes? Yeah.
What about this?
This one. This is a really interesting place. It's called Frenchman Coulee. I hate to tell people to go there because right now it's overrun with rock climbers.
You can say any rock climber knows about it.
Yeah, rock climber knows where. Yeah. It's a fantastic place geologically. It's really interesting.
So do you want to conclude, Tyler, and then I'll say a few words just as we end?
Yeah, I wanted to quickly talk about the nature landscape photography. Obviously, more pictures of rocks and trees tend to be frowned on in the fine art community when it comes to landscape. What's kind of hipper now is to make a comment. And if there's a Coke can right there, I'd be in way more galleries than I am. And that stuff's great. I have a lot of respect for that as time marches on. It's a bigger and bigger issue. The fact that people are editorializing about what's happening to the land is important. But I choose to stick with what's the fundamental aspects of my relationship to it, which is also a big deal for all of us too, because if we lose that, that's the connection at the heart of it. Also, what's important to me is my connection to the area. If you look at like Atget's pictures of Paris, or there's a painter I love who's painted in Maine, very famous. I'm sure you would know who he is. Huh? No, everybody knows who he is, except me. Andrew Wyeth. When you look at Andrew Wyeth's work, you know he's so connected to that place. So it's important to me to explore that, rather than go to Yosemite and make more pictures of Half Dome. That's about it.
First of all, let's give Tyler a hand. Thank you so much, Tyler. Really nicely done walking us through your history and then the works. Also, thank you so much for everyone who came today, especially the Googlers. I know it's a busy day, especially on a Monday, and thank you so much for your time. And again, a thank you to everyone who came from the Kirkland Arts Center and then from across the wider Seattle community. I think it really speaks to what we're doing here almost by accident. And this program really now has its own sort of momentum, and I think we must have at least 20 or 30 people here today. So thank you again for coming. Let's give ourselves a hand. It's really nice to be back. So 2 last announcements from me.